The room was pitch dark, with only the eerie glow of the digital clock on the nightstand. 2:17 a.m. Sarah opened her eyes, her heart pounding frantically. Something wasn't right. An ominous presence filled the air and a chill ran down her spine. In a panic, she realized she couldn't move a single muscle. Paralyzed, the woman stared in front of her, wide-eyed eyes darting back and forth, searching the darkness for any sign of movement. She tried to call out to her husband, sleeping soundly beside her, but no sound escaped her lips. Her throat constricted as if an invisible hand was clutching it. In the eerie silence, Sarah could hear her own ragged breathing, each desperate gulp of air amplified in the night's stillness. She strained her eyes, trying to make out any outline or shadows in the blackness that enveloped her. But there was nothing. Only oppressive darkness. She felt everything around her shrinking, a palpable force pressing down and suffocating her. The heaviness on her chest made it hard to breathe, as if some invisible entity was sitting on her and pinning her to the ground. In a panic, she tried to free herself, to shake off the invisible force holding her captive. But her limbs refused to obey. She was trapped in her own body. Panic turned to terror when she realized the presence of a stranger in the room. She couldn't see him, couldn't hear him, but she felt a dark energy looming over her, watching and waiting. Her heart pounded, blood beating frantically in her veins. Time seemed to slow down, each moment of paralysis stretching into eternity. The shadowy figure drew closer and closer, its presence becoming more and more suffocating. Sarah tensed, struggling against the invisible tethers, desperately trying to free herself, to break free from the nightmare that engulfed her. But it was useless. She was completely powerless, at the mercy of the malevolent creature looming over her. A sudden movement in the corner of her eye made her heart jump in her chest. Slowly she turned her head. A few inches from her face stood a pair of glowing, inhuman eyes, black as onyx and devoid of any sign of humanity. From the darkness came a low, guttural growl that sent shivers running through her paralyzed body. Sarah tried to scream, to call for help, but her voice remained trapped, muffled by the iron grip of the nightmare. The demonic presence drew closer, its acrid breath touching her face, and she could make out the faint outlines of a distorted, deformed face, sunken eyes, jagged teeth, skin stretched over a skeletal frame. A shiver of revulsion ran through her as the creature's bony fingers encircled her throat and squeezed with inhuman strength. The pressure was excruciating, robbing her of precious air, and she felt her consciousness begin to fade. This was it. She would die right here in her bed, at the mercy of this hellish, otherworldly creature. Just as the darkness threatened to engulf her, a desperate scream escaped her throat. The creature recoiled, its grip loosened, and in that moment, Sarah felt a surge of energy, pure, adrenaline-fueled determination. With all her might, she fought the paralysis, forcing her limbs to move to push the demon away. Slowly, but her body responded, muscles tensing as she pushed the creature away from her. The demon let out a shriek and vanished into the darkness, leaving Sarah panting, with her heart pounding in her chest. She lay shivering for what seemed like an eternity, taking deep, shuddering breaths, and her body covered in cold sweat. Gradually, the paralysis began to subside, and her limbs regained mobility. Trembling, she reached out and turned on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with a warm, soothing light. Sarah looked around the familiar space, running from one corner to the next, searching for any sign of the demonic presence that tormented her. But the room was empty and silent, with only the sound of her own ragged breathing. She was alone. With a sigh of relief, Sarah rolled onto her side and turned to face her sleeping husband. His peaceful, unbroken slumber only added to the lingering fear that gripped her. How could he be so calm, oblivious to the horrors that had just occurred? She fought the urge to wake him, to demand that he acknowledge the nightmare she had just endured. Instead, she lay wide-eyed and shivering, unable to rid herself of the memories. The first rays of dawn glimmered on the horizon, but Sarah couldn't sleep. She knew with absolute certainty that the nightmare was not over, and the demonic essence that tormented her would return. And when it did, she would be powerless to stop it. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the curtains and illuminated the room, Sarah pulled herself together and prepared herself for the long, dark and sleepless nights that lay ahead. For deep down, she knew that she had been chosen by the forces of darkness to be their plaything,